Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Really quickly, I do want to get to, another game from Wednesday night, and it was the Arkansas-Missouri game, okay? And I think it was a really interesting matchup. Arkansas, like UConn, is reeling. Arkansas, like UConn, was very good in November into December. Unlike UConn, Arkansas actually has some injury problems. That's the other thing about UConn. They can't blame it on, well, if we just had this guy. They got everybody basically at full strength, at least since the beginning of the season. So back to Arkansas, Missouri, but they played on Wednesday night, and it was a really big SEC game. Arkansas came into the game at 1-4 in SEC play, 3 straight losses. Missouri came in at 2-3, 3 straight losses in SEC play as well. And so I bring it up because it was a important game for both teams. Big game, SEC Network. I think everybody is excited about it. Just one problem. One, credit to Missouri. They pulled out the win. But that is not the story of the game unless you are a diehard Missouri fan. The story of the game for the rest of us watching is that for yet another marquee, major, big-time SEC game, the referees absolutely hijacked that thing. I thought they ruined the viewing experience. And what I would say is this: they made one call so bad late that the SEC office had to actually step in and issue an apology. It was a bad night for the SEC, and I hate to say it. I think it continues a very disturbing trend for this league in basketball in their big games where the referees are letting down the fans. And so let's get into it because Missouri does win by 3. I don't want to call it a fun game. It wasn't a fun game. It was tough to watch. But the one thing I want to make clear before we get into the referee stuff is I want to make sure to let everybody know. I'm not saying that the refs cost Arkansas the game, okay? Missouri wins 79-76. I'm not saying the refs cost Arkansas the game. Now, in a way, they sort of did. But I want to give credit to Missouri. Dennis Gates has done an incredible job in a short amount of time. They're building, not only toughness in his team, but, great environment and excitement about that team and that fan base. So I want to credit Missouri for everything that they have already done this season. Missouri was the deserving team. The problem was, whether Missouri was deserving or not is independent of the fact that, the game was just taken over by the refs early. And nobody was never able to gain control, okay? So here are some stats about this game on Wednesday night at Missouri. And keep in mind, some Arkansas fans are listening, maybe a few Missouri fans. Some of you are not fans of either team. But let me ask you a simple question. If you didn't watch this game, I'm going to throw some stats at you, and I want to know what you think when I have to say this. In this game, there were 56 total fouls called, okay? 56 total fouls called in a 40-minute basketball game. This didn't go triple overtime. And I understand there were 2 or 3 late, whatever. 56 total fouls called. There were in total 33 on Arkansas, 23 on Missouri. 4 different Arkansas players, fouled out. 1 finished with 4 fouls, 2 finished with 3. So Arkansas's top 7 players all finished with at least 3 fouls, 4 total fouled out. And how about this? There were 65 total free throws in a 40-minute regulation basketball game, 40 of which were by Missouri. That is not good. And here is the bigger issue. There was one play that I don't want to say absolutely definitively cost Arkansas the game, but it certainly didn't help, and it was really bad, and the SEC, as I said, had to issue an apology for something that they just completely missed and is inexcusable, okay? So with about a minute to go, it's a tie game. Again, not saying the refs are the reason that Missouri won or Arkansas lost, but late in the game, Arkansas guard Devo Davis drives into the lane trying to get a foul call. He is called for a charge, maybe a little bit out of control, but reviews, like we saw on video review, that the player for Missouri, his feet were in the restricted area. His feet were in the restricted area, and by rule, that has to be called a defensive foul. If your feet are inside a certain length from the basket, that has to be called a defensive foul. The reason being, college basketball doesn't want guys taking charges right under the basket because that is unsafe. So the referees missed it on the floor. They went to the league office. The league office said, you can't review that, and it was called a charge on the floor. Cost Devo Davis the game. Obviously, Missouri from there takes control. They end up winning. But why I bring it up is because on Thursday morning, the SEC acknowledged that they missed that call in that game. Crucial game, under a minute to go, star player for Arkansas, or one of their 2 or 3 most important players, charge call that should have been by rule a block that could have been reviewed that wasn't. Here's what the SEC put out on Thursday afternoon. This is a statement from the SEC. With 43.7 seconds remaining in the second half of the Arkansas at Missouri men's basketball game on January 18th, the officials called a player control foul, that's a charge, against an Arkansas player that came into contact with a Missouri defender who was inside the restricted area arc. By rule, the location of the player in relation to the restricted area is reviewable in the last 2 minutes of the contest. When the officials on site went to review the play, the video replay center incorrectly communicated to them that the play was not reviewable. Therefore, the play stood as called on the floor. That is the official statement from the league. So the league office, this is what they just acknowledged now. This is not my words. This is not my opinion. This is what the league office just acknowledged. They acknowledged that there was a call on the floor that was wrong, that the referees on the floor knew they were wrong, went to the league office. The league office said, sorry, even though you blew that one, you can't review it. It is not a reviewable play. Sent that back to the officials on site, and the play is called off incorrectly. And the league office, who's sitting in an ivory tower, they're doing nothing. Listen, we can blame the refs or whatever. They're in the heat of the moment. There's 15,000 people looking at them. The people in the league office who were supposed to know the rule had no idea. I'm not saying it cost Arkansas the game, but it kind of sort of cost Arkansas the game. Here's the crazy part too. You can sit here and say, and I'm sure some of you are driving around like, why is Torres so fired up about this? Here's why. There's a couple reasons why. One, I think you could sit there and say, well, come on. There's a million rules in the rule book. Guys are going to miss it. Okay. First of all, you're paid not to miss it. Second of all, the league office is really paid to make sure they know the rule book. But here's the other reason. Here's the other reason why you should have never missed that call. Because if you are a diehard college basketball fan, you probably know this rule. You probably know that if your feet are within a certain range of the basket, the restricted arc, if the defender's feet are inside the restricted arc, that has to be called a block. And not only does it have to be called a block, but it can be overturned on video review. How do I know that? It is because 3 years ago, there was a very controversial play in a very high-profile game where this exact same thing happened. 2019, Duke Blue Devils, Zion Williamson. Do you remember that name? Duke was the #1 team in the country. They're steamrolling everybody. They go to Louisville, I believe, on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. Louisville probably plays the best game they play under Chris Mack the entire time he's there. They're up 23 points at one point. They rally. They being Duke. Duke rallies. They get back into it late in the game. Cam Reddish drives, attacks the basket, gets called for a charge. Just one problem. Ryan McMahon, remember that name, Louisville fans, his feet were within the arc. They go to video replay and they overturn it. And I remember this play because I remember talking about it on this podcast. I think it was the first year I had this podcast. I said, I've never heard of being able to overrule a charge block call on review. Of course, if it's going to happen in favor of Duke. But Duke won a game because a charge was called a block because the guy's foot was in the restricted area. So the fact that I'm the only one that remembers that, isn't that the official's job? That's the official's job to get it right. And if they can't get it right on the floor, it's the league office's job to know that, hey, these guys screwed it up, but we can overturn this. Just let them know. They can go to video replay. They can overturn this. They can make the right call. They didn't, and Arkansas ends up losing. And so to me, one, this is completely inexcusable. But two, Beyond that, this is a crisis for the SEC right now. Let me explain why. Listen, I watch all these leagues. I watch all these games. I watch as much as I can. I can tell you that fundamentally, games in the SEC are called differently than other leagues. And I think it's hurting the product on the floor in the SEC. This isn't just my opinion, by the way. It's a fact. I went back and looked it up. Arkansas, Alabama, last week, top 15 matchup, two big teams, two big brands. 45 fouls called in that game. 45 fouls in a 40-minute basketball game. And oh, by the way, there were 11 more called in Arkansas, Missouri. You can't say that's all how Arkansas plays or how Missouri plays or how Alabama plays. That's too many foul calls in a 40-minute game. On top of that, if you say, oh, well, it's just Arkansas, every game is like that. Tennessee, Kentucky on Saturday, 43 foul calls in a 40-minute game. Those are three of the most high-profile games where you had 43-plus foul calls in a 40-minute basketball game in three super high-profile games. You can't have that. It has to be better. And I'm telling you, you watch other leagues, games aren't called like this. Just for fun, I went back and looked it up. So Marquette played Xavier on Sunday. It was a great game. It was during one of the NFL playoff games. I think the Bills, Dolphins. I don't know how many people were paying attention. But for fun, I decided to say, you know what? Let me see how many fouls were called, because I'm curious, because it feels like the Big East, they can get away with some stuff that you can't in the SEC. Went back and looked it up. In that game, there were a total of 30 fouls called. Now, would I like to see a few less? Maybe. But the bottom line remains, 30 fouls in a 40-minute game is a lot different than even 43, let alone 56. Xavier, UConn earlier in the year. UConn, big, physical, tough. We just talked about UConn. 30 fouls called in that game. And so to me, let me wrap by saying this. I want to get to Jamie and Christian. What I will say is pretty straightforward. Part of what I do on this show, I talk about whatever the big topic of the day is, okay? And there are often times that I like to come on here and have an answer to a tough question. Okay, Auburn fires its football coach. What should they do? UConn is struggling right now. What do they need to do? But there are some times that I come on this show and I say, I don't have an answer, but something's clearly got to change, right? I don't always have to have the answer, but sometimes it's obvious something has to change. I'll give you an example. Los Angeles Chargers. I don't know if they can get Sean Payton, but what I do know is Brandon Staley's not the answer, and bringing him back for another year, all you're doing is wasting a year of Justin Herbert's prime. Don't know what the solution is, but I do know the solution isn't to bring back Brandon Staley for another year. And that's why I bring it up with the SEC basketball. I don't have all of the answers. I'm not Greg Sankey. I'm not paid millions of dollars a year to have every answer going in college sports. But what I do know is I know a problem when I see it. I don't have to know how to fix mold in the ceiling to know that we got freaking mold in the ceiling. And right now we got mold in the SEC offices because this refereeing thing has to be better. It's crazy to me, this incredible product. The SEC is the front runner in college sports in everything. College football, college baseball, Olympic sports, non-revenue sports, gymnastics. All I see is these Friday Night Lights previews for all these big gymnastics meet in the SEC that are going to draw 10,000 people. But they can't figure out the refereeing in basketball, a multi-$100 million product, SEC sports. They can't figure out the refereeing. It's got to be better. I don't need an answer, but what I do know is it's got to be fixed.